Good morning, everyone. Thank you for spending this beautiful Sunday attending a forum. Uh, and we've got in front of us a really good panel from various backgrounds as well as varying degrees in terms of years of experience in media. Um, Thank you to Malaysia Forum for organizing this. I First, before we go into the panel, which, by the way, I really love the title, Selamat Pagi Malaysia. There's a ceria part, really, upbeat note. Selamat Pagi Malaysia, and then the dose of reality towards media maturity. I think it's a really good setting in terms of what we're going to be talking about this morning. What does maturity mean? What does it mean for Malaysia? Specifically because we're looking at the Malaysian context. How important is it for media to play its role in terms of providing information? That's just one of the roles that media plays, providing information. And it's especially crucial now with the elections coming soon and with the 10 minutes that has been offered to the various political parties to air their pre-recorded manifestos on RTM. Another question that was posed in terms of the discussion today is quote-unquote alternative media, the rise of that, and how has that had an impact on views and standards. And I think I would also like to pose to the panel if they actually agree with the terms like alternative media. Yeah, because I think that kind of framing, is that helpful? Is that relevant in the current situation? Because for media advocates, for example, media freedom advocates, we sometimes don't use terms like alternative media. We use terms like new media because it incorporates other things as well. So apart from that, I would also like to look at the role of social media and how has that impact in terms of how print functions, how websites function as well. And the last question in terms of setting the stage for today's discussion, do Malaysians need mass media that caters to sensitivities? Are we ready for a change in the way we report stories, we report news? So I think that has given us quite huge leeway in terms of what we want to discuss. Just now, the moderator, sorry, the MC has introduced very briefly, but I found out one thing about the panel of speakers today, something that they have in common together with a carpet seller, as well as our current Prime Minister, as well as our current Home Minister. And what would that be? They went to the same school. They're all St. John's alumni. Okay. Okay. We've got a lively discussion here. Okay. Before we give the floor to them, and it will be KL Chan. KL, of course, is the current chief editor of Selangor Times. So he's got a community, media, and local issues background. So it's going to be very micro, but looking at the micro, reflecting on the questions that was posed earlier. KL will speak first. The second speaker will be Jahabar. Jahabar has had some experience in print, traditional print in Malaysia, as well as working for Reuters and AP Television and the bureau at the bureau in Malaysia, as well as in the region. He's covered Afghanistan, etc. for them. So he started in New Straits Times before going to Business Times way back in '93, just to give you an idea of how old he is. On the left, it's my pleasure to welcome Ketat. Ketat, of course, is the current Group Chief Executive Officer of the Edge Media Group. He is leading their regional expansion. Of course, he's just, prior to this, he was at the Star as the Managing Editor, CEO, Managing Editor, and Chief Operating Officer. Before that, sorry? not managing editor. Okay, so that's wrong. But ex-CEO and Chief Operating Officer of Star Publications. Before that, of course, he was with the Edge, a Chief Editor of the Edge. Okay, you guys are being given 10 minutes each to reflect on your own experience and the questions that was posed earlier. What is media maturity? But before that, I just very quickly, I want this to be a bit interactive. How mature do you think media in Malaysia is? This is posed to the audience before we give it to the panelists. Do you think media in Malaysia is mature? Please put up your hands if you think that's the case. Okay, the contrarian that he is. In terms of, do you think new media, as in online media, is mature, more mature than print media? Is that a leading question? Okay, but okay, we've got about 15 people who answered yes. Okay, first on the chopping block, KL Chan, Chief Editor of Selangor Times. 10 minutes, please speak into the microphone because there are people in other parts of the world that are also trying to listen to this conversation. Thank you.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm actually a bit confused with the term media maturity, and I don't understand in some sense what the public means, or when you talk about media maturity. Okay, I think we have always had degrees of media maturity. That has been getting better. You see on stations, especially on the broadcast level. Things like Astro Awani, they really have some really good talk shows. BFM is now a current favorite with very hot topics being discussed. So when you want to say is media mature in that sense, yes, it is. I've worked with NST. There's another common thing that the three of us share, which is we are all formerly from NST at one point of time, and NST has always had very good features in the past, journalistic features, especially New Sunday Times and all that, okay, where they dedicate lots of space to discuss the issue from all separate angles. So we have a lot of media maturity in that respect, okay. On Selangor Times, okay, and then there are different aspects. There's some anomalies which take place in media here that which is not fully understood, is that there are degrees of leeway given to different types of papers. Say vernacular papers, for instance, when you talk about sensitive issues like religion, for instance, these topics have always been discussed in papers like Utusan Melayu. Okay, the vernacular papers like Chinese papers are very strong on race issues. It's widely debated in those papers. It is the English print media which is a bit shy on these topics, and to some extent, what the vernacular papers to some extent get away or given leeway by the authorities is not extended to the English press, print media especially. And so you find English print media sometimes does try to steer away from this because of licensing issues. Selangor Times is a very odd case in the sense that our publisher is actually the Selangor government, but we are not owned by Selangor. It is subcontracted out for no fee to a separate company, Selangor Times, and in that sense, we don't come under KDN and we don't really come under Selangor government. So we have a little bit of leeway in that sense. That's why you will see columns like very naughty columns like Lawyer Buruk coming out in making statements and very very strong opinions on a number of issues. In that sense, like I said, we sort of are out of that sphere. Our news section is very community based. We don't do party politics, and in that sense, we don't get into that sort of any of the issues over there lah. As for the state of journalism, again, one of the main problems here is you see a monopoly, which is not unique to Malaysia actually, because in the UK you have quite a number of media which is owned by one person. His empire extends all the way to Australia as well. In US you have big groups like Time, Warner, and any form of monopoly in that sense is unhealthy. Here more than elsewhere lah. In another major problem as for which affects the print media especially is licensing issues. And of course there's and the print media, of course, everywhere is facing a lot of pressure from the internet media. Okay, one of the problems I see in media these days is that we're not building institutions anymore. The media the newspaper is a very odd thing in the sense that it needs to be run like a business in order to survive and pay for itself, and yet it needs to be an institution in that sense. So NST was very good in that sense for me, as there's a very strong tradition and institution in that sense, but we are not building that sort of thing anymore, and yeah, I think that's all for me.
Just a second before I give it to you. Jahabar, you have 5 minutes. Just now you asked for 5 minutes. You got it. Because I think they're trying to make it shorter. Don't cover issues that KL has already covered. Perhaps talk from your perspective in terms of the Malaysian Insider, the role that it plays, looking at media maturity. How do you think TMI plays a part in terms of quote-unquote building a more mature media in Malaysia, and competition with social media?
Okay, good morning. That was just an instruction from the governor today as to what I can say. And this happens all the time in Malaysian media. You get people telling you what to do. So she just told me what to say, so I'll just repeat whatever she wants me to say. First of all, I think KL covered a lot about what Malaysian media is in terms of print. And now, in the last 10, 15 years, we have this thing called new media. I've always wondered how long before we get to it just being media. How new is new? If it's 15 years old, it can't be new, can it? The great thing about any of us on the internet is anyone now with a so-called smartphone can access us, which means newspapers are on its way out, which also explains why KTAT's group is also now going into digital media. They've got a digital-only magazine called the Edge Review, which is very regional. What it does is that's a serious part of journalism. It discusses issues at a regional level, at a philosophical level for Malaysians. I want to bring up this point for one good reason. My columnist Hafiz Nur Shams, the earlier moderator, writes really well. But if you ever read him on the Malaysian Insider, but he will only get like maybe 10 likes, 4 recommendations. Meanwhile, my other columnist, Anna Mahyuni, writes a lot about race and angst at being a Sabahan, and that gets like 500 hits and 1,000 recommendations. So maturity actually is a two-way process. Maturity is a journalist being able to write, or a writer or a columnist being able to write on issues very well, and at the same time the audience, the reader themselves responding to it, right? What has happened, and we think in terms of competition with social media, is all of us here have either a Facebook account or a Twitter account. All of you self-publish. All of you have opinions and comments. And you might make a snide remark whenever Hafiz talks about tax or socialism. You might think he's wrong, or you might think he's right. But you also self-publish, At what level is your maturity? At what level is a columnist maturity? So something like the Insider or Malaysia Kini, our first job is to make money. Otherwise, there is no us, there'll be somebody else. There's Facebook. And nobody goes to your Facebook because they don't know you, right? So you need platforms like the Malaysian Insider, Malaysia Kini, Selangor Times, The Edge, to be your soapbox, right? And why this is important is we, the professional journalists, three of us, who used to be in NST, who studied in St. John's, with some funny politicians and dodgy carpet traders, our job is to curate that, to tell you, to point to you which is important. You know, why I'll give you an example. In Malaysian Insider, we change our leads maybe 4 or 5 times a day. The first reason was always to spook Malaysia Kini. So they also will change their lead. Otherwise, they have the same lead for 8 hours. That was always our first intention. Second intention is for us, well, the real intention is for us to tell you, this is the important story of the day. I get a lot of people telling me, why do you feature Dr. Mahathir? Why do you feature Ibrahim Ali? They are irrelevant to the cause, to the national conversation. I have to disagree. These two chaps are very influential with the government of the day. Right? Unless, as the earlier speakers were talking about, any changes, there's no left, there's no right. You know, they're always what they call non-state actors, people of influence off the stage, behind the stage. You know, one of them is at the back there. His name is Hitch. He was just telling me a funny story just now about what he did last year. But what my point is, we need to cover all these guys because they are relevant to our national conversation. You know, the important thing about the media is it's a country talking to itself. That's what the media is. We are a reflection of what our fellow citizens are. How mature we are, how immature we are, how juvenile we are, is based on the feedback we get from our readers. If I had my way, I'll put a page 3 girl every day. But on the internet, there are no page 3. You know, I can just put a picture of a pretty girl like that Salvador Dali blog, right? He keeps putting pictures of pretty girls so that you understand his economics better. I wish I could do that. I don't have a license I can actually do that, but I think, you know, there are enough pictures of pretty girls around anyway, so I don't think people come to the site for pretty girls, right? But see, these are things we do just to get you guys to come over and read us, you know, to attract you. But more importantly is our writing, you know. So I wish more people would read Hafiz because he gives very deep insights as to policies of, I don't know, are there policies in this country? You know, I sense there's just a lot of populism in this country. No one talks about policies. No one discusses policies. If you read this morning's papers, how many of you read the papers this morning? I mean, physical paper, not browsing the site, right? You would, what was on the front page of all the papers? Yeah, manifesto, right? Because they had no time. It was launched at 8:30. They had no time to look at it and say, you know, isn't this a continuation of Pemandu's points in the last 3 years? That's why it looked to me, more brim, more brim, more brim. No one is there to say, analyze. No journalist can analyze it yet because it was just last night. But in the next few days, that's what we want to do. And that's what, and we need input from people. I'm beyond 5 minutes, right? We need input from people. You know, these are the relevant things that we need to discuss. Where is this country this time next year? You know, and why your vote is important to make sure this country goes where you want it to go next year. Where these chaps who are no longer on Skype, one of them was holding a flag, another one was sleeping. Where do they want this country to go next year when they come back, right? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jahabar. The problem with people who say that they're going to take 5 minutes is that they usually take 7. And they will take 1 minute to talk about page 3 girls. Okay, the next person.
Okay.
Ketat, shoot please.
I think we need to go and discuss the terms that we often use. Alternative media, new media, mainstream media. I think sometimes all of us, including those of us in the industry, we use these terms loosely without an understanding or an agreement on what it means. But let me just, let's start with what we often hear, a free and independent press. I think free and independent are related, but they are not the same. Let me explain. I think what we should all fight for and demand is the free media environment. By free, I mean anyone who wishes or is silly enough to start a media, whether it's print, radio, website, TV, should be allowed to. That's the free media environment. Anyone who wishes to launch a media should be allowed to. There's no need for licensing. And in the Malaysian context, currently that only happens with the internet. That's free. That's freedom for me. Free media. Independent media. Can we really have an independent media? Is there such a thing as independent media? If we declare that we are an independent media, who are we independent of? Independent of the authorities? Independent of our shareholders? Independent of the public? Is there true independence? I don't think there is such a thing as an independent media, because at any stage, we are dependent on someone. In a licensing environment, we are dependent on the authorities to give us a license. Even if there's no licensing, we are depending on the money put in by shareholders. So, as journalists, as practitioners, if we truly want to be independent, we have to come out with our own money to start our own publication. So, I think what we should fight for is free media environment, and anyone, whether you are left-leaning, right-leaning, centrist, or whatever cause you want to fight for, should be allowed to do it. And then your success or failure will depend on how the public, the readers, the market take to your media. So there is a difference between free media and independent media. Coming back to maturity, I agree in some ways with Jahabar. When you pose the question, do we have media maturity? It shouldn't just be on the part of media practitioner. What about the public? What about the readers? Does the public know or appreciate or understand what media maturity is? I'll give you an example. In Malaysia, the readership of newspapers is very, very low. Unlike the UK, if you look at the UK, in a way I disagree with Chan, there's no monopoly in UK. They've got big groups, but there's no monopoly. They have many, many media groups. There are many national newspapers. There are many regional newspapers. Population 60, 70 million, UK, I think. How are they able to support so many newspapers all these years? Why? Because the public is mature to know that in order for media to succeed, they must be willing to pay. You look at Scandinavian countries, small country, the people there read 3 or 4 newspapers a day. Here, how many newspapers are we willing to read? How many of us are willing to pay to support the media? Because as Jahabar said, good journalism doesn't come cheap, but more free. And today we are demanding for free news. Right? Selangor Times is free. Insider is free. We just launched a free news website called fzac.com. It's free. And we all know how much it costs us a month. We have to pay for salaries. So, back to the question of maturity. Is the Malaysian public mature enough to want to support a vibrant, pluralistic media? I know many people spending $10 on a Starbucks coffee, nothing. Ask them to buy 3 newspapers a day or subscribe to a few websites if they wish. Do you think it'll happen? I'll give you another example before I finish off. I was at a dinner the other night, and a businessman said to me, "Wow, your newspaper very expensive," referring to the age, 5 ringgit a week. So I said, 5 ringgit a week is less than a ringgit a day. And you say it's expensive? So, is the Malaysian public mature enough to do what is necessary to support a vibrant media in Malaysia? I think when they say that we deserve the government we get, we also deserve the media that we get. And it's back to the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Ketat. There was a very enthusiastic clap from that side. Okay, Ketat, since you came last, I'm going to take up on your point in terms of what you said earlier, and you will go first. I will just ask basically prompting questions to each panelist before I open it to the floor and before I entertain questions from other parts of the world. Okay, Ketat, you talked about maturity. You talked about independence. Yeah, I think in terms of the independent model, yes, media will always have to somehow answer to owners, to some extent to advertisers, especially to owners. In Malaysia, there is also that added, thing that hangs on top of every editor's head, which is to answer to the Home Ministry, especially for print. In terms of independence, is it independence from those forces? In countries like the UK, for example, and in some media, yes, they are, for example, owned by a company or a group that leans toward a particular side of in terms of the political spectrum. But in terms of the news, they do give, fair comment. They do give points of views, not just two, but multiple points of views on policy issues, which can then generate discussion, etc., create understanding. So if you're talking about media providing information, playing that important role of providing information, then that would be what independence is. How do you see that happening in Malaysia?
Well, I think I must stress that we must all fight for a free media environment where there's no need for licensing. I think we must start with that. On the question of independence, in a newspaper environment or in most media, there's the news, there is what we call the editorial position of the newspaper. News is reporting what's happening, providing the information to the public. In that area, I think a good media should have fair, accurate, and balanced coverage. Doesn't matter which side, in the case of politics, which side of the political divide the newspaper supports. Where the news pages are concerned, they should be free, fair, and balanced reporting. And as far as the editorial position of the newspaper is concerned, all newspapers take an editorial position. And that editorial position is a reflection of agreement between the owners of the newspaper and the editorial leadership. Must come to an agreement. If you look at in the States, the New York Times is left-leaning. So the New York Times will always support a presidential candidate from the Democratic Party. The Wall Street Journal, on the other hand, is right-leaning. So they'll always support a presidential candidate from the Republican Party. So that is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So similarly in Malaysia, the day we have a media environment where the situation exists, as I just explained, would be an ideal situation for me. As a media practitioner, the news is fair, balanced. The editorial position, who you support, right, it's an editorial position of the paper, and it should be respected by everybody. You know, it's just like what Jahabar said this now. The what I call the extreme voices that we have today exist on both sides. They exist on both sides. One side will criticize the other side and say this. You know, how come? Like in this instance, you want to fight for press freedom, right? And yet, if someone gives Tun Dr. Mahathir or Ibrahim Ali the space, they don't accept it. You know, so unfortunately, the country is very divided and people have taken an extreme position. So I think it's very important for those of us in the media and even the public to try and, you know, take a pretty moderating position to moderate the two extreme views in this country. It doesn't matter what our personal opinion is, but I think as a media practitioner, it's very important for us to try and moderate the two extreme views. Thank you.
Okay, just one sec. Just now you mentioned about we must first and foremost fight for free media. I think there is a demand from the public for the licensing regime to basically be thrown out the window. There's also demand for licensing regime, for no licensing regime by media practitioners. You, as at the top in terms of the editorial part of the media, you've had to deal with owners, etc. I'm sure on more than one occasion. How do you foresee media owners supporting this push to do away with licensing in Malaysia?
I think from a selfish business point of view, as a media owner, if I'm a media owner, I would say no, because I don't want competition to enter, right, from a business point of view. But to take that position would be an unsustainable position. I think so. I think all media owners should support this change, any change in the law, that there's no need for licensing. I think in Hong Kong, the practice in Hong Kong is a good example. There's no need for licensing, but anyone who wants to start a newspaper should register with some agency, just to say, I'm Ho Kay Tat, I'm starting a newspaper, this is my company, this is my address, so that somebody knows who I am. Unlike in the internet, right? That's the difference. In the internet, you can start a site, you can start a blog, and nobody knows who you are. I think that's the other extreme. I think that's the worst extreme. People who hide behind something, do not disclose, and say anything they want. Those are, to me, that's bad. So the Hong Kong example is very good. Anybody who wants to start a newspaper, just register. And to answer your question, yes, I think media owners should support because it's good for the industry in the long run, although in the short term, it may mean competition for the existing players.
Do you think there's enough support at the moment from owners to do away with licenses?
I can't speak on everyone's behalf, but definitely for the H Media Group, we would support that.
All right, thanks. Okay, Jahabar. It's actually a bit warm here, so I fully understand the concept of hot seat. Just now you mentioned Ibrahim Ali and Dr. Mahathir being relevant to the national conversation. Ketat also talked about media freedom, and for those voices as well, and when those voices are put out there and people criticize and say, like we shouldn't be giving space to them. How do you, as someone who operates new media, and new media is all about clicks, yeah? How many people read the piece of news that you have up there? How relevant is, say, the statements from Ibrahim Ali, for example? When you put up something from Ibrahim Ali, how do you sort of, quote unquote, temper his ethnocentric, verging on violent, call to arms, really? Because he often plays and dances that tune. So how do you temper that and still give space for him to speak?
It's an interesting question. You know, when you give space to this gentleman called Ibrahim Ali, he speaks for himself, right? Every violent word, everything that he says, it's coming from him, and you need to put that out so people can understand that people like him exist in our country, right? Now, how do you temper that? You don't. What we do, we take an editorial stand that we will write what we call a side view, our opinion that this guy is an idiot, he's not fit to be here. But we don't say that, right? We just say, look, this is what he says. People like him shouldn't be given any support, right? We are a country where there's so many people at the fringes with very loud voices. And Ketat is right. Be it in the far right or on the far left, you know, people at the fringe are always really off-center, as they say. But you have to give them space. I temper it by getting columnists like, again, I need to quote my favorite columnist there, Hafiz. We get a lot of people to write. You know, for every famous guy who writes, every infamous guy who writes, on the same platform, on the same front page, you might have an Ibrahim Ali mouthing some nonsense. But you also have columnists, opinion writers saying the reverse. Why? Boils down to what Ketat was saying, how mature are readers, for them to read this, understand it, comprehend it, get informed, and then decide for themselves what country you want. At the same time, decide what media you want. I would support people reading newspapers like Utusan. The reality, just veering a bit on the politics because it's media. The reality of 2008, which a lot of people ignored, was thanks to the success of the education system, all of us read Bahasa Malaysia. And what we did was we used to take all the rantings of all this ethnocentric people and put it on the Insider because no one would buy the Utusan. You know, every year they make a loss of 10 million and then magically they get back the money because none of you buy them anyway, right? Anyone here buys the Utusan? One. You have to because your work. Yeah, right? Some of you do it because it's work. Otherwise, you know, or you want to line your kitty litter. But you have to read them. I read them to see all points of view in Malaysia. I don't temper it. You can't. You know, then again, this is, yeah.
Because when I say temper, I don't mean you tone down what he says or you half report what he says. If he says, you know, Chinese people should go out and stock up on their food items in their pantry, then you report that as is. By tempering, I mean the journalists at the press conference. Because sometimes I wonder what an Ibrahim Ali press conference is like. Yeah, like when he spouts all these things, what kind of questions do journalists ask him about what he knows? What is his source? When he says something, where does he get that information? How many people is he speaking for? Whenever he calls for people to congregate, like what, 50 people showed up at Taman Titiwangsa in the anti-Bersih, you know? So in other words, I think, yes, we need to give space for all kinds of views, even views that we strongly disagree with, but there are ways with which to temper that view. You then ask, say, you know, an academic who speaks on ethnicity, someone who works on, currently there are various groups, IRF for example, that talks about dialogue between communities, not just religious communities, but also ethnic communities. So that's what I meant by temper.
Yeah, I get that point. You know, I haven't attended a Ibrahim Ali press conference in years. What he does is he just keeps texting us all his thoughts. And occasionally has a press conference in Dewan Datuk Sulaiman, which is right in smack in the middle of Kampung Baru. And then just says everything he wants to say and takes 3 questions and then he's off. Then again, I think I have to train my journalists better to ask questions. Except I think I work for the Malaysian Insider. My philosophy is simple. I push out the news ASAP. Something happens, I put it out within 5 minutes, right? And then I tell my colleagues, okay, hang on a minute. In the next 3 hours, I want an analysis of what he said. You speak to the professor, You speak to Mas from CIJ and get her thoughts on this. You get a few people and let's put out it's not a counter argument or counterpoint, but analyze it. That's what ideally we do, right? We're trying to do that. It's not easy because there's so much news in Malaysia. For me, there's a lot of news in Malaysia. For you, maybe not. Boils down to the first lesson I learned as a journalist: relevance. People who read the Insider, people who read Selangor Times, people who read The Edge, they read it because it's relevant to their thoughts, their mind, right? I try to add to the mix this Ibrahim Ali's, some of the PKR chaps, some of the DAP chaps, all of them, so that you have a smorgasbord of viewpoints. And then, like what I said earlier, you get informed and then you decide who among these jokers speaks for you. You know, I tell everyone these elections, we are going to elect 222 jokers. And then the king will decide that one of them is the ringmaster. Right? For you to know these jokers, and I say in the best possible, most respectful way, is for me to report everything all of them say. And I hope you get to read what the Edge decides, opines about them, about the election, what Selangor Times, covering the election, right? Are you? Not, okay. Selangor Times might not be covering the election, so okay. But you have to read everything. And you know, yesterday, 1 minute. Yesterday, Dr. Mahathir said he would support Ibrahim Ali under Barisan Nasional banner. Now, I ask you this question. Do you think Dato' Ibrahim Ali will be a candidate in this election? How many of you think he will be? Most non-interactive forum I've ever been. On sleepy Sunday morning. No, you know why he'll be? Because Dr. Mahathir says so. But, you know, that tells me one thing about our country. We haven't moved from 10 years ago when Mahathir was still our Prime Minister. I was driving the other day somewhere and my colleague and my business partner, Leslie, we were just saying, when we were students in the 80s, I'm still young. When I was in school in the 80s, Mahathir and Kit Siang were in the national newspapers. Today, this year I'm 45, I'm still reporting about Kit Siang challenging Dr. Mahathir to contest in Galang Patah. You know, how sad is our country that we are still talking about the same people for the last 30, 40 years. How sad is our country that young people like yourselves, all around the world, all Malaysians, are not taking up the cudgels to say, it's my time to lead this country. Right? So I try to get younger people to write for us. My ambition is to get 100 columnists. Every year I fail. I get only about 40, and they write once and they're happy, and then they wait 6 months and they have another thought and they write again. Okay? This is why Mr. Lim Kit Siang and Dr. Mahathir Mohamad are great. Mr. Lim Kit Siang, when he lost the elections in 2004, when he lost the elections, and I hate it when he loses elections, he sends out 8 statements a day. When he wins elections, he only sends out 4. Okay, but he started off as a journalist in the Singapore Straits Times. He writes every day, and that's the start.
Jahabar, okay, I just have to stop you because there's a whole list of questions here. I'm going to go with the question from the floor. Xian Jin in Kuala Lumpur. Please ask your question.
Hi, I'm Ong Chen Jun. So I read both the Age and the Malaysian Insider, but the Malaysian Insider is free, so it gives me much more pleasure reading it. So thank you for putting up Malaysian Insider online for free. But I guess coming back to Mr. Ho Keng Tat's comment on that the media is never independent because there's always a funder or owner behind it. And also to your comment on Hong Kong, needing to put up a list who is responsible for which media. When I go to the Malaysia Insider, I don't really know who the owner or the funder is. Do you think your readers deserve to know who the funder of the Malaysia Insider is? Because, for example, when I go to the Star, I know it's owned by MCA. When I go to Utusan, I know it's owned by UMNO. So I can read that in that context. So I guess the question is, would you tell us who your funder is, and do you think the readers deserve to know? Thank you.
It's very easy to answer that question. You fund me. Whenever you read, there's a click, a page view, I get ads. Okay, who gave us the initial capital? A whole bunch of businessmen who, like a lot of Malaysians who, Keta was saying, who make anonymous blogs, they don't want to be known because they do business with the government, and they have a conscience. So they decided, oh, let's put in some money, call Jahabar, pay him a hell of a lot less than he was earning when he was in Reuters to come back to Malaysia and run this website. But, my funders are Malaysians who believe that we need more media. They're also the ones who wanted to set up a newspaper, and I told them, don't be stupid. You will never make money. In the last 5 years, we have not made money. Right? Do you think MCA owns the Star? How do you know that for sure? Do you think UMNO owns Utusan? How do you know that for sure? Because if you think that, if you think Utusan is owned by UMNO, they're doing a great job of making sure UMNO loses at the election. Seriously. But I'm going to tell you who my funders are. A bunch of businessmen who don't want to be named, who've given me not a lot of money, but enough to survive. And I get a lot of money from my Google ads, from advertisers like, thank God, like CMB Bank, Air Asia. They provide a fair bit of money, and it's enough to pay for 30 people who haven't got a pay rise in the last 2 years. So every day I ask myself this question: should I be a paid site like Malaysia Kini, so that all of you have ownership, have an emotional attachment, and say, I need to keep this alive? And then on the other side, I think, no, I don't want to do that. So that at least one day I can wake up and say, just switch off the goddamn server. None of these buggers deserve to read what we write. That's what I feel sometimes. But now, seriously, that's what, every day I ask myself this question: how long can you go free? Pay top professionals 6,000 to 7,000 ringgit a month to work 18 hours a day, bringing news for all of you to read for free. There's a joke among us in the online news that all of you get to read free because some European organization decided to give us a grant, to spread democracy and free thought and all that. And the joke is no joke, it's true. A lot of us get, well, I don't, but a lot of people get a lot of funding and grants so that all of you can read for free. I hope you shouldn't complain about Mr. Ho Kay Tat's publication. You pay $5, you get 80 pages every weekend. And really, take out the ads about watches and all that. It's still pretty good stuff.
Jahabar, I'm going to, just one second. Ketat, because he brought it up, I'm going to just ask you a pointed question and just yes, no, and then we go to the next question, and I will give you an opportunity to talk later. Does the MCA own the Star? Because he said, how do you know the MCA owns the Star? Sorry?
Star is a listed company. Star is a listed company. Actually, just to the point, the Star and Utusan, the ownership is very transparent because they are both listed on the stock exchange. And Star and Utusan are the only two media owned by political parties that are very transparent. Because if you look at the shareholding, the Star MCA owns about 45%. It's there. Utusan, UMNO owns, I think, about 30% or 40%. It's there, UMNO. Media Prima, I think it's hidden behind nominees. So as far as Utusan and Star is concerned, very transparent who owns or who controls, not owns, because they don't own 100%, who controls the two companies?
Thanks, Ketat. The next question, since I did not ask KL just now, so the next question is for KL to address first. Okay, it's quite a cute question, I think. In the scenario that a new government is formed after GE13 and a more free atmosphere is created for the media, how do you foresee the current crop of mainstream media practitioners reacting to that? That's one. Two, will there be a chaotic rush to be seen as the most independent media? Emphasis on the. KL, just a few minutes, please.
I think the mainstream media will go on as usual. Nothing much will change greatly. There are still, I mean, the newspapers and the media groups all survive mainly because of advertising. And it would take quite a long time to dismantle this relationship that the advertisers already have with these media companies. So in that sense, as long as they remain profitable, not a lot of major changes are going to take place. As for, what's the second question?
The second part says, will there be a chaotic rush to take on the mantle of quote-unquote the independent media?
Okay, that is an interesting question, and in the sense that Indonesia had a similar thing back in when the post-Suharto in 1989, yeah, and when they opened up the media, you found that every Tom, Dick, and Harry said, oh, I can make money out of this, and once you can go in, and it was open to a lot more companies and newspapers to come up, but over time, everybody tried to champion the independent and the free thing. Over time, the quality will stand out. So what you have is it's a good competition, whereby only the fittest will survive.
Ketat, I'm going to ask you to answer that question, and also perhaps reflect on another question that is in some ways quite similar to this one. How, if there is no licensing regime, I'm assuming that this kind of question actually presupposes a change in government and therefore a change in terms of a point of view with regard to licensing and whether that should stay or not. How can we ensure sustainable, continued verification and validity of, it says companies, but I'm sure I'm going to assume that it's about media. That is a question from Anonymous in Singapore.
On the question of the removal of licensing, I think regardless of who wins the election, the public should continue to demand that change takes place. So really, whether it's Pakatan or Barisan which wins the government, I think that is something that we should press on. The second question, I don't quite understand the question about, in a free media environment, how do we verify the validity? Oh, okay. Competition. I mean, the media business, although media has got a certain public and social responsibility, at the end of the day, we are no different from any service provider. Whether you are selling fried chicken, at the end of the day, if the public does not accept your product, you will not survive. That's why I meant by let the marketplace decide which media should survive and which media will not. And that will depend on how the media operates,
Earlier when we talked about maturity and we say there isn't that, the maturity in terms of the buyers, there isn't enough maturity to sustain a media that is critical, that is independent, etc. So it sounds like it's if you allow free market forces to dictate what the sustainability and media being the existence of a media, for example, would that be something that is almost like a, you killing off yourself? Because if you are, for quote unquote, a serious media, there won't be that kind of popular public support for it. That's one. Two, in terms of could there be a model where there is public funding for media, given precisely what you mentioned earlier, the social role that media plays?
Let me just say that in Malaysia, the rule of thumb among media players is that you must be either number one or number two in order to be able to be profitable. If you're a radio station or newspaper or TV station, you must be either number one or number two, which means that the market meaning both the viewers and readers and the advertisers, can generally support only two media in each category. That's the rule of thumb. The reason is because two. One is, I think it means consumers generally will not consume more than two media. And advertisers will not support more than two media. If you're number three, sorry. Let's look at the English newspaper segment, for instance. The Star, the NST, and the Sun used to fight it out many years, even Malay Mail. Today it's changed. The Sun is the free paper, the Malay Mail is struggling, the NST is still there, the Star is still there, because number one and number two. From a consumer point of view, where I come from, putting myself as a consumer, I think it would be my interest to make sure at least four. Why leave it to two? Which means we should support. It's no different from what I do when I go out and decide where I want to eat, where I want to shop. I make sure that I don't shop always at one place, even if it's the cheapest. I don't eat only at the same place, even if it's the cheapest. I want to make sure that this guy has got competition, and it's not just one competition, but two or three competitors. Because it's only with competition that in the end, the consumers win. Today, the guy can sell you his chicken rice very cheap. But if you just consume his chicken rice and kill off all the competitors, he's going to jack up his price. It's very simple logic. The media is no different. Which comes back to what I said originally. The public deserve the media you get because you decided that this would be the only media around.
Thanks for that. Should I give the floor to either Shannon first or Barry? Shannon, question, please. Come here. Don't be shy. You're a journalist.
I agree largely with all the panelists about how media maturity is not so much about journalist practices and stuff like that, although that is important, but more on the business maturity, whether the industry is mature, whether it's ready. But that said, and all the challenges that you talk about, free marketplace and so on and so forth, it actually does look like media as a business in Malaysia is struggling. We talk about Utusan losing money every year, so on and so forth. Very few are prospering. I'm just wondering, the respective heads of your own newspapers, websites, media groups, so on and so forth, if this pattern keeps going on next 5 years, 10 years, in what shape or form can we see your own businesses existing? Will the paid models become free? Will the free models become paid? Will you have to go regional, so on and so forth? So to bring an example in terms of paying just 5 ringgit for the Edge, I don't think that's exorbitant, but you have to take into account the consumer who has an iPad can pay 5 ringgit a month for Esquire. So it's cheaper. I'm not going to argue whether it's better or not, but because it's global now, we can all subscribe to The Economist, to the Esquire, so on and so forth. So how does Malaysian media compete in that landscape?
Can I get KL first to answer? There are quite a few questions.
Okay. I think what Keita has been saying to some extent is that there's, and even Jahabar, is that there's no such thing as free lunch. Okay. Either consumers pay for the media, and that helps to a large extent to keeping it independent and working in your interests, or you let someone else pay for it. And that could be advertisers, that could be, political owners, business owners with other interests. So having said that, so Shannon is asking about how media would last. Yeah, what you guys gonna do? Yeah. So I think for us, well, we are already a free media, Selangor Times, and in that sense, we will keep it free as long as the advertisers keep supporting us. And but it will come a time where, in order to get better stuff, that the media has to, the public has to say, look, I've got to support something else other than what they are normally accustomed to. And again, the Keita is fair in saying that we don't consume enough different types of media, so that results in what you call concentration in one or two people. It doesn't help in this country that our media is not limited to one language. There are actually 4 languages. Yeah. So the guys who read sometimes read the Chinese papers or the Malay paper or the BM papers, they don't consume another media. So that's problematic for the guys who are doing English, for instance. Okay.
I think you mentioned just now in terms of that, but I will have a question that actually, yeah, for you.
So Shannon, we hope that you'll be kind and generous enough to subscribe to Vanity Fair, Economist, and The Age. It comes back to that, Shannon, is how much, as a consumer, as a Malaysian public, if you value a vibrant, and if you acknowledge the need for a vibrant media, you acknowledge the need for a good media in Malaysia, you should support it. Economist is Economist. Economists will never be able to cover Malaysia the way a Malaysian publication will, right? I read The Economist too, for a different perspective. Of course, on our part, we got to make sure that you feel that the 5 ringgit you spent is of value to us. And the only way for us to do that is we have to invest in good journalism. And good journalism is not cheap. Let me assure you, as CEO of the company, we struggle dealing with good journalism. Every day our journalists are being pinched. Last night, I was told one of our top writer is being pinched by a bank. So how do we cope? How do we replace good talent to match? Somebody has to put in the money. But at the end of the day, as Chan says, it's the consumers, whether a consumer as a subscriber and reader or consumer as an advertiser. If you do not support, we won't exist. And that's a fact when the money runs out.
Before you return the microphone to me, could you answer? There's a question from another anonymous in Singapore. There are many anonymous people in Singapore. And the question is specific to you, because after this there will be a question for Jahabar. This one asks, why has the mainstream media not centered more on policy matters instead of less, quote-unquote, less significant matters?
I think, yeah, it's a good question. Policy matters and political rhetorics, right? Newspapers media tend to be attracted to political rhetorics. But that's also, I think, a reflection of the readers. As Jahabar will tell you, we know what headlines attract more readers, more viewers. Unfortunately, it's just like sex sells, right? Unfortunately, so it'll take time. It'll take time for us to build up the policy debate, policy discussion in media. I would like to think that for the age, because we are not mass. If you are mass, then you are caught in this game where you need big numbers, and the only way to build up big numbers is to have sexy headlines and focus on the rhetorics. The age we are not mass, we are niche, so we are able to have more on policy debate compared to the mass media.
Okay, after this to Jahabar. Actually, the question, the way it's posed, it says, Philip Low from, sorry, one sec. Question from Wee Ming in London to any panelist, but Jahabar is fine too. So me being cheeky, it means only Jahabar will be answering this question. Comments on TMI tend to be hyper-partisan. One sec. Comments on TMI happen to be hyper-partisan. Have Malaysians learned to engage in civil discourse through the media, be it on quote-unquote alternative or traditional?
Very interesting question. I think for years, all of us just read the papers and in coffee shops at home and ranted and raved to our better half or our worst half and left it at that. Or discuss it at the surau. With online media, you get a chance to put in your 2 cents worth. To you, it's worth 2 cents. To somebody else, it's worth nothing, right? So you get all kinds of keyboard warriors coming in, saying all kinds of things. Truth be told, we get about 4,000 comments a day. You get to see 400. Why? The rest are really not worth your time. My moderators take 3 showers a day. They feel so unclean. You know, they feel very unclean, all the bad words. You know, I've banned words like C4, Najis, Rosie. A lot of these comments are not even relevant to the article. It's just that somebody wants so much of rage. Oh, Malaysians are so angry. When it's the same thing that's called road rage. You know, this guy who's mild-mannered guy like KL goes behind the wheel of a car and becomes this angry motorist. So a lot of Malaysians have the same attitude at the keyboard. They throw away reason and civility and get very partisan, get very personal, and just say everything and then sign off anonymous. You know, and they get very creative in names because we ban all these words. Then their handle is Najis or N4J15. Yeah, and it comes out and they're happy. Is there civil discourse? Zero. In Malaysia, none of us are civil online. I hate it. I get the same commentators who used to be in Malaysia today. You know, I think the Star is wise, they don't put comments. Have you ever seen the comments in Malaysia, Kini? It's even worse than us because it's unmoderated. So, yeah, none of you are civil. So, neither am I.
I think maybe, you know, for the longest time, we did not have an opportunity to sort of air your views, etc. And perhaps what you see is sort of the outburst that you see in Indonesia post-reformasi in terms of the media. So people are going out and saying whatever they want. So that maturity will take a bit of time until people learn to talk about issues and not resort to name-calling, etc. to address that. Yeah. If you've got something to add, could you hold that thought? Because I've got 2 people here who have questions. So can I ask you to ask the question 1, 2, and then I give some time for each panelist to answer those questions as well as other things that they feel that they would like to say something about. Barry, please.
Hi, I actually have 2 questions. I hope this doesn't take too much time. The first is related to Wiming's question, sort of. In mainstream and non-mainstream media, it seems like you guys are preaching to mutually exclusive choirs. You know, like they're quite distinct groups. Those who read like Malaysia Kini or Malaysian Insider, and those who read The Star and stuff. So could you comment on that? Second would be the discussion of sensitive issues. It seems like are Malaysians ready to discuss sensitive issues like religion and all that? And who should lead the maturity race in this aspect? Would it be media leading the leading the public to, raising the levels of maturity, or do you just write for whatever level of maturity Malaysians are at?
Thank you. This question for Jahabar. I noticed the Malaysian Insider reproduces verbatim reports and pieces from particularly vernacular papers like Utusan and Sinshu. Is this a public service or plagiarism?
There are actually another question from the floor as well as a host of other questions. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time. We actually have 14 minutes to address them. So what I'll do is I'll give the floor to each speaker, beginning with KL. Remember to address the 3 questions that were asked by both Barry as well as Bob. And for you, KL, just now when you wanted to say something about maturity in terms of comments on new media, sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, coming from print, I've also worked in Malaysia Kini as well. It's not fair to say that entirely true that there's some truth to the fact that, when we get behind the keyboard or the new people now commenting, there's a lot of crap out there. But coming from print, we still get letters written in, okay? And these are usually from the slightly, especially as a community paper. My target market is really a lot of older folks, who are interested in municipal council issues, and they do articulate their viewpoints very well without the expletives. It's only with the which is why on our website we also do not have a comment section, because we don't want to spend time sifting through the muck. Okay, that just to clarify that stuff lah. I won't take the Bob because that's for Jahabar. As for are we ready to take sensitive subjects? I think we are. It's already there on Facebook and all that. It's just how do we do it. And as for who leads, I think it should go hand in hand between the media and the public. Yeah.
Okay, I'll reply to Bob's question first. Is it plagiarism? Gosh, I hope not. Yeah, I look at it as public service. How many of you here actually go to the mysinchu.com website? Do you even know it exists? 1, 2, 3. Shannon has to because he's been with us. How many of you go to the Utusan website? Yeah, because of us, Utusan decided to post all their stories, complete stories after 6 p.m. Why this? Before I answer Barry's question, why this is important for us as a public service is, when I first came back to Malaysia in 2010, very short story, don't worry, was the first day I worked was the day after the great decision by a court that the Herald can use the word Allah in their Malay publication. On the 8th of January, just after midnight, a church in Melawati got firebombed. 12:30, I was at a pub, first week at a job, drinking away, like all journalists do. And we got this news that this church got firebombed. And you still have this old print newsroom ethics that says, after midnight, nobody cares. We'll send a photographer in the morning. So I told my photographer, just go and check on this. 3:30 in the morning, I get a press release from the church. They actually have a PR outfit. They send us 3 pictures and whatever happened. We put it up at 6:30 in the morning, like Malaysia Kini. And the Star also put it up. The NST's first report at 11:30 was the Prime Minister regretting it happened. But he never actually explained what happened. That told me on that day the power of the new media, that we can inform people and shape people's opinion hours ahead of print. Because print only comes out the next day. And TV news is at 8 p.m. at night. But from 6:30 in the morning till 8 p.m. at night, we were cowboys catching every cow in the field, so to speak, and telling you what was going on. And we were shaping your opinion, So Utusan knew that if we put it out online, that we will shape your opinion about them, about their columnists. Sinchu is in Chinese, in Mandarin. I can't read Mandarin, but they have translations, which is available on mysinchu.com. Not the most perfect of English, but there it is. It's their opinion, and we put it out there so people know that in this country there's opinions from the vernacular press, and it means something because they are a sizable minority in the country. So I do it as a public service, so people know, people are informed. Are we ready to lead this discussion about race or religion in this country? Yeah. I think the media has a huge role to play in this, as much as all of us here, readers and members of the public, also have to be civil and mature enough to discuss it without getting emotional. Everyone who discusses race and religion in Malaysia get very emotional because it's their turf. Muslims get upset because even the word Allah you want to steal from us. You know, that's the kind of discussion. You know, someone was telling me that day in Kampung Pandan, the saying is better a bad Muslim than a good Christian when you go and vote. You know, so everything is now distilled in our little silos. You know, why do people read the Kini and don't read the Insider? Why people read Edge and they don't read Focus Malaysia? Everyone's got their preferences, and they want to read something that's relevant to their lives because they don't know. They haven't taken out the blinkers to say, actually, I need to know more before I can form an opinion. We are a country where we now listen to our peers, word of mouth, and that shapes our opinion because we don't read enough. None of us read enough. Anyone reads anything beyond what their interests are? How many of you read Vanity Fair? How many men read Vanity Fair? Or GQ or Esquire or Rolling Stone? Yeah, all would, right? But, you know, what Ketat said just now is very true. Four newspapers you got to support. You know, cut down on one Starbucks coffee a week. You can buy 4 newspapers a day. Seriously. Thank you.
Ketat, before I give the microphone to you, there's actually a question from the floor, and we do have just a little bit of time. So I would like to address that. Sabrina Chan from KL floor, very quickly.
Hi. I just wanted to ask, you guys have mentioned sort of competition amongst yourself as media, but what about competition against just your consumers, the people, like you said, the people who are, on the ground and telling each other, giving each other their opinion. What do you think about sort of user-generated content that's flowing through social media? Are you just like competing amongst yourself, value-add information?
Yeah, we have not spoken much about social media and user-generated content. In the old days, when we first started in journalism, there is we do depend on the social media of that generation. What is the social media of that generation? When I started in the Malay Mail, the great social media or user-generated content was the hotline. We in Malay Mail used to have this service called a hotline, where people who had a problem or who had something to say will call up the hotline and tell us. Today, that hotline doesn't necessarily come direct to us anymore. It is shared among the public, right? The social media. I think we have to tap onto the social media too to find out what's the chatter out there. What's the chatter out there? If there's a chatter that's of interest to us, we'll have to pick it up and see whether there's a story there or verify that there's something that's happening. I think in recent times there have been incidents where the newspapers have actually tapped on what's been said on Facebook or whatever to generate a story. So yes, we do. I know that a lot of people tell me that I don't read the newspapers anymore. And how do you keep in touch with the news? Oh, Facebook. My friend will send me stuff about what he or she read somewhere else. So in a way, yes, there's competition, but it's also become a very useful tool for the media to actually find out what's the chatter out there and see whether there's a story that's worth chasing.
Before I give the microphone to Jahabar to say something about social media, I just want to say that there is a difference between, say, media responding to media houses responding to breaking news on social media, but in terms of holding on to principles of journalism, of course, there's a huge difference, yeah, because we're actually not talking about two same things. People who do social media, etc., it could also be that what is put out there is not, the veracity of that is not established yet. So people just put out whatever they want. Whereas for media houses, there actually is a demand for, journalistic standards to be upheld too. How well they do that, that is, up for debate. But for you, Jahabar.
I think Mas just answered my question. The question. I just want to add, online media, we take a lot from social media. They give us a lot of tip-offs, but like Mas said, we have to verify it. Verification takes time. But what I've noticed is, Ketat's point about people sharing things through Facebook is over the last 2 years, 3 years, our content, whether it's Edge, Selangor Times, or Insider or Kini, our content becomes your discontent. You gripe about it, like Ibrahim Ali, sorry, whatever, wanker, idiot, whatever. Whatever we create is content for you to use and push on and with your own comments. So people like Ketat, KL, myself, my few journalistic colleagues outside there, sitting here, we won't die. We will get better because we'll always be the experts to tell you what is news. Without us, Twitter will be a very quiet place. Facebook will just be for games, Farmville. No reason to have Facebook if you don't share things, right? Or photos of last night's drinking party or what. You need something serious. So we are in competition, but more increasingly, we are your content.
Kale, you don't have anything. Okay, then I've got 1 minute to say something. I just want to take up your point, Jahabar. You said that new media or journalism, actually, media really then decides and are the experts, quote unquote. To some extent, I think I agree with that. However, I think given the rise of social media, given that a news breaking story can actually appear on social media first before it hits, quote unquote, these experts for them to comment, curate, etc. And also, I look at the coverage of Bersih, for example. Yeah, Bersih 2, the cover for the Star. I used to work at the Star. The cover for the Star actually showed the protesters. In my experience, prior to Bersih 2, no print media would actually show a huge crowd of people protesting. Yeah. So I think that kind of journalism, that kind of new practice is up there precisely because the photos have made its rounds on Twitter, on Facebook. So in some ways, media, serious journalists actually are responding to the stakes that have been upped by people on social media. Yes, there is a particular role that journalists play, but there is that tension as well, and there is that pressure that is put out there in the same way that new media puts the pressure on print media. We actually don't have any more time, but we've given enough room for the speakers to speak and for the questions to be asked as well. So like any panel at the end, could we give a huge round of applause? I think it's been a very interesting panel. Thank you very much. Thanks, and I pass the microphone back to the